Josiah Bell had raked the same yard for 31 years. On the day they sold the ranch out from under him, an auctioneer's boy tipped over the old man's trunk on the block and pulled out a folded, sun-faded square of cloth and held it up to the crowd like a dishrag somebody forgot in the barn. Josiah did not reach for it. He only took off his hat. Dell Rourke, the land agent, laughed for the benefit of the 40 buyers packed into the yard. "That's a bunkhouse rag, folks. Sold. 1 bit. Don't crowd." A harness peddler in the third row bought it for 12 cents to wipe grease off his leather, and across the yard, a gray-mustached man in a dark coat stepped down from a hired buggy, saw the cloth in the boy's fist, and went rigid, his hand halfway to the brim of his hat, and stopping there. If you believe respect is earned in silence, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe and tell me in the comments the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this old flag travels. Now, let me tell you about the man in the yard. Josiah Bell came to the Lundquist ranch the year the creek froze solid. That was a hard winter, the kind old men still measured other winters against. The water in the wash went to stone a foot down, and the cattle bawled at ice they could not break. And a stranger walked up the wagon road with a bedroll on his shoulder and asked Anders Lundquist for work. He did not say where he had come from. He did not say much of anything. Lundquist looked at his hands and looked at his eyes and told him there was a bunk in the far corner and beans in the pot, and that was the whole of the hiring. He stayed 31 years. In all that time he mended fence and broke ice and hauled feed. He pulled calves in the spring mud with his coat off in the cold. He dug post holes in ground that fought the bar. He never asked for more than his wage, and some seasons he did not ask for that, because he could see the ledger going thin and he did not want to be the line that broke it. He slept in the same corner bunk. He ate at the end of the table. When the other hands went to town on a Saturday to drink and fight and spend, Josiah stayed behind and oiled the harness and sat on the bunkhouse step and watched the light go long over the hills. The town knew him the way a town knows its fixtures. "There goes the old Lundquist hand," they'd say. "Deaf as a fence post." Which was not quite true. He heard well enough when a man faced him and spoke plain, but he had a way of not answering that folks took for deafness, and he never corrected them. It was easier. Silence had been good to him. He wore it like a coat. He had a ruined right hand. 2 fingers gone from it, the smallest and the one beside it, cut clean off at the knuckle so the hand looked shorted, like a glove with the ends tucked in. Children stared at it. Grown men did too, when they thought he could not see. Once a young hand fresh from Missouri asked him straight out what happened, and Josiah looked at the boy a moment and said, "Rope." And that was all. A rope had taken them, he said, and any man who had worked cattle knew a rope could do worse than that, could take a whole hand or drag a man under a herd, so nobody pressed it. He lost them to a rope. It was the kind of answer that closed a door gently, and he was good at closing doors gently. He had one habit the whole ranch remarked on, and it was this: he could not leave a cloth lying flat. Give the man a feed sack, a saddle blanket, a torn shirt bound for the rag pile, and his hands would fold it. Not the way most men fold a thing, corner to nearest corner, careless. Josiah folded in 3s. He'd bring one long edge across, and then bring the point up, and turn it again, until whatever it was had become a tight, neat triangle sitting in his palm like something meant to be handed to a man who mattered. He did it without looking. He did it while he was talking. When he did talk, his eyes somewhere else, and his ruined hands making that same shape over and over, the point tucked under, the fold squared off. The younger hands used to laugh at it, old Josiah and his 3-cornered dish towels. He never seemed to hear that either. The one soul on the whole place who treated him like more than a fixture was Cora, Anders Lundquist's daughter. She had grown up on the ranch with the old hand always somewhere in the background of her life, splitting wood, walking a horse cool, a quiet gray shape at the edge of the yard. When she was small, she had been half afraid of him, of the not talking, and the hand. But her father was not afraid of him, and a child watches her father, and Anders Lundquist treated Josiah with a plain, steady respect that had no explanation to it, and so Cora learned to as well. Every morning her father had carried a cup of coffee out to wherever Josiah was working and set it on a post or a rail beside him without a word, and gone back in. It was the only ceremony the two men had. And when Anders got too stiff in the knees to do it himself, he asked Cora to, and she did, and after her father passed, she went on doing it, because it seemed a thing that ought not to stop. Black, no sugar, in the same dented tin cup that lived on the bunkhouse shelf, she'd set it down on the rail. Josiah would touch 2 fingers to his hat brim, the ruined hand, always the ruined hand, and she'd go back to the house. Neither of them ever said a thing. 31 years, and she was not sure she had heard the man string 10 words together. But she knew the sound of that cup finding the rail, and he knew the sound of her step on the frozen ground, and that was a kind of conversation, though nobody would have called it one. Then, Anders Lundquist died in his sleep in the back bedroom, in the deep of another cold winter, and everything the old man had built began to come apart in his hands from beyond the grave. There was no money. There had not been money for a long while, only the appearance of it, and the appearance ran out fast once the man who kept it up was gone. Anders had borrowed against the land in a lean year, and borrowed again in a leaner one, and the note was held by the Cheyenne Stock and Land Trust, which was a name on a piece of paper 200 miles away, and had no face and no memory of any calf pulled from any mud. The trust did not care that a family had wintered on that ground for 30 years. The trust cared about the note, and when Cora, who had never seen the papers, finally saw the papers, she understood that the ranch was not hers to keep. It had stopped being her father's the day he signed. It was only that nobody had come to collect. Now, they came to collect. They sent a man named Dell Rourke. Rourke was an estate liquidator, which was a polite way of saying he made his living off the worst day of other people's lives. He bought foreclosed spreads cheap from the banks, and he sold off every board and nail and animal, and whatever was left of the land he flipped to the next man with cash, and he was good at it, and he liked that he was good at it. He came out to the Lundquist place in a fine coat, with a watch chain across his vest, and walked the buildings with a little book, and he did not take his hat off in the house where a man had just died, and Cora watched him make his marks and hated him with a clean cold hatred she had not known she had in her. "You'll want to be gone before the sale," Rourke told her, not unkindly, which was worse. "It's easier that way. Folks come to buy don't like to see the family standing about." Puts a damper on the bidding. He clicked his little book shut. "The hand can stay to help clear it if he's got no place. I'll want the buildings emptied to the block." The hand. That was Josiah. Rourke had looked at him once, the first day, and filed him under labor, the way you'd note a good axe or a sound wagon, and thought no more of it. Josiah had no papers of his own. Of course he did not. In 31 years nobody had ever thought to make him any, least of all himself. He had no deed, and no lease, and no letter saying he was owed a thing. He had a bunk that was about to be sold, and a wage that was about to stop, and nowhere on God's earth to go. He was 72 years old, and when Cora came to tell him, gently, what she'd been told, that the place was going and there was nothing to be done, he listened to her with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the middle distance, and when she was finished, he nodded once, slow, and said, "I'll get the barn swept out for them." That was all. "I'll get the barn swept out for them." As if the trouble were dust on a floor. His whole life fit in a trunk at the foot of the bunk. Cora saw it the day he set it out to be looked over, because Rourke wanted everything on the block, every stitch, and a hired boy went bunk to bunk turning out what the hands had left. Josiah's trunk held a spare shirt, worn thin at the elbows and clean. It held the dented tin cup. It held a razor and a strop and a small stub of soap. And under those, wrapped in a flour sack, it held a folded square of cloth. She saw him take it out. She had come to bring the coffee, out of habit, though the rail he'd stood at was already carted off, and she found him sitting on the edge of the stripped bunk with the folded thing in his two hands, the good and the ruined, resting on his knees. He was not unfolding it. He was only holding it, the way you'd hold a sleeping child you didn't want to wake, and looking at it, and his face had come open in a way she had never once seen it, some grief in it so old it had gone quiet, like a scar that has stopped hurting but never stops being there. "Josiah," she said. "Careful. What is it?" He did not startle. He turned it a little in his hands, and she saw it was faded near to gray, and that it had been finer once, and that along one edge there were stitches worked in colored thread too worn now to read. She thought of a quilt square. She thought of something a mother makes, something I was told to keep, he said. And then, after a moment, in that flat plain voice, quieter than the rest, "Colors up." She did not know what that meant. She thought it was a queer thing to say about a keepsake. She thought maybe his mind had gone soft at the edge, the way old men's did, and that it was a blanket off a bed he'd loved, or a scrap from a home she'd never heard him name. "Colors up." She filed it away the way you file a thing you mean to ask about later, and never do. "You'll keep it," she said. "That's yours. That's not for the sale." "No," he agreed. "That's not for the sale." And he wrapped it back in the flour sack, corner to corner, that same triangle fold, the point tucked under, and set it in the bottom of the trunk, and put the shirt over it, and the cup, and closed the lid. And Cora went away and did not think of it again for a while, because there was a whole world coming apart, and one folded cloth was a small thing in it. The auction was set for a Saturday in April, when the roads had dried enough to bring the wagons. They came from all over the county, ranchers who wanted the Lundquist bottom land for their own herds, small men who wanted a good milk cow cheap, or a wagon, or a set of tools, speculators who wanted whatever could be, got for less than it was worth, which was Rourke's own crowd, men who smelled of foreclosure the way a crow smells a field. 40 of them, near enough, standing about the yard in the spring sun with their thumbs in their vests, and Rourke up on a flat wagon bed for a stage with a boy beside him to fetch and hold up the goods. Cora had meant to be gone, the way Rourke told her. She could not make herself do it. She stood at the edge of it all, in a dark dress with her hands folded, watching her father's life be carried up piece by piece and knocked down to strangers. The good saddle. The team. The kitchen table her mother had scrubbed white. Each thing held up, and joked over, and sold, and carried off to a wagon that was not hers. She stood and took it, because leaving felt like a worse betrayal than staying. Josiah stood off to the side by the barn he had swept out for them. He had on his one clean shirt. He had his hat on. He was not there to buy. He had $12 to his name and nowhere to put a bought thing, but he could not be anywhere else while the ranch was sold, any more than a man can leave a graveside before the last of it is done. So he stood, gray and still, and the auction went on around him, and nobody paid him any mind. Then the boy brought up his trunk. They'd emptied it onto the wagon bed, the way they'd emptied every hand's kit, to sell the goods loose and then the box itself. The shirt, the razor, the cup, which a woman bought for a nickel. And then the boy's hand found the flour sack in the bottom, and shook the folded cloth out of it, and did not know what it was, and looked to Rourke. Rourke took it up one-handed and snapped it open to the air the way you'd shake out a tablecloth to show it had no holes, and the crowd saw a rag. That is all they saw. In the flat, bright light of that April morning, 40 people looked at a threadbare square of cloth, gone the color of old ash, stained dark in a great blotch across one half, and scorched brown along an edge, worn so thin in places the sun came through it, and with some faded stitching along the hem that at that distance was only dirt. It hung from Rourke's fist limp and sorry-looking, and it looked exactly like what a man wipes his hands on and throws in a corner, and Rourke, who had sold 1,000 such lots and had an instinct for a laugh, gave the crowd its laugh. Well now. He held it out at arm's length and looked at it down his nose. What have we here? The late gentleman's finest linen. A chuckle moved through the yard. No, I'll tell you what it is, folks, that there is a genuine bunkhouse rag, wiped many a plate and greased many a boot, and it can be yours today. Bigger laugh now. He was rolling. Do I hear $1 for this piece of history? No? A man of taste in the back? No. All right. All right. He flapped it. It's a rag, I won't insult you. Who'll give me a bit for a good grease cloth? 1 bit. Somebody's harness'll thank you. Here, called the harness peddler, a young fellow named Hobie Teal, who traveled the county with a wagon full of straps and buckles, and always needed something to wipe his hands and his leather on. He held up a coin. 12 cents. I'll give you 12 cents for it and not a penny more. It's half rotted. Sold, said Rourke, to the man who knows the value of $1. 12 cents. Don't crowd, there's more. And the boy carried the cloth over to Hobie's wagon and dropped it across the harness rail, and Rourke was already holding up the trunk itself. And the auction rolled on. And through the whole of it, the joke, the laugh, the flapping of the cloth in a stranger's fist, the 12 cents, the boy carrying it away like so much trash. Josiah Bell stood by the barn and took off his hat. He did it slow. He reached up with the ruined right hand and lifted the hat off his gray head and held it against his chest, and he stood there bareheaded in the sun while men laughed, the way a man stands when something is being buried. He did not shout. He did not step forward. He did not say, "That is mine," or "You don't know what you're holding," or any of the things a man in a story is supposed to say. He only bared his head and stood, and his lips moved once, and no sound came out, and if you had been close enough to see his eyes, you would have looked away, because there are some things a stranger has no business seeing on another man's face. Cora saw it. From across the yard, she saw the old hand take off his hat over a 12-cent rag, while the crowd laughed, and she did not understand it, but something in it went into her like a splinter and stayed. Men take off their hats for 3 things, her father used to say: a lady, a prayer, and the dead. And there was no lady in that cloth and no prayer being said. She looked at the unfolded now, flung over a rail. She looked at the sorry gray thing on Hobie Teal's wagon, and then back at the old man standing bareheaded and shamed and silent, and for the first time in her life she thought, I do not know this man at all. The rest of the sale went the way such things go. By late afternoon the yard was rutted with wheel tracks and empty of everything that could be carried, and Rourke had his numbers in his little book and a fine mood on him, and the buyers drifted off toward town with their bargains roped in their wagons. The Lundquist ranch, that had been a home in the morning, was by evening only a set of empty buildings and a torn-up yard, waiting for the next thing. And Josiah's cloth rode off on a peddler's wagon under a smear of harness grease. It got worse before it got better, the way these things do. Hobie Teal drove into Ashford town that evening and put his wagon up at the livery, and being a friendly, talky sort, he showed off his day's haul at the store the way peddlers do. And when the town clerk, a soft pink man named Elias Speck, who had come out to the sale for the sport of it, saw the gray rag hung over the harness rail, he laughed his high laugh and said, "Lord, Teal, did you buy the old fool's dish towel?" I saw that go up. 12 cents. Rourke near split himself. And Hobie, not wanting to look a fool for buying rotted cloth, laughed along and said it wiped grease fine and that was all it was good for, and a couple of men leaning on the counter had their laugh too, at the old deaf hand and his 3-cornered rags, and the whole thing became, for an evening, the joke of the town. the dish towel that a man took his hat off to. You should have seen him. Stood there like it was his own mother going in the ground. Over a rag. Cora heard about it. Ashford was small, and a story like that traveled the way a story does when it lets small men feel large, and by the next day she had heard 3 people tell it, each with more laughing in it than the last, and each telling put the splinter in a little deeper. Because she had been there. She had seen the man's face. And it had not been the face of a fool. She went out to the ranch to find him. He was still there. Where else would he go? Sleeping now in the swept barn like a stray, with his trunk gone and his whole world sold, and she found him mending a stretch of the north fence. Just mending it. The ranch was not his. The fence was not his. There was no wage in it, and no reason to it. But a wire had come down in the wind, and Josiah Bell could no more walk past a downed wire than he could fly, and so there he was in the cold morning splicing it tight with his good hand and his ruined one, the way he had 1,000 mornings before. She had brought coffee. She did not know why. There was no rail to set it on now, so she just held the cup out to him, and he looked at it, and something moved in his face, and he took it in the ruined hand and touched his hat brim with it, and drank. "Josiah," she said, "that cloth, the one that got sold." She watched his face. The one you stood up for." He drank his coffee and looked at the fence. "They're all laughing about it in town," she said, and hated to say it, but said it. "The clerk. Everybody, and I keep thinking about how you stood there." She took a breath. "It wasn't a rag. Was it?" "I don't believe it was a rag." For a long moment she thought he would only give her the fence and the silence, the way he gave everyone the silence, and she would go home no wiser. But he set the cup down on a fence rail, that old motion, coffee on a rail, and he picked up the loose end of a feed sack that lay across the wire where he'd been kneeling on it, and while he looked at her, or through her, his hands began to fold it. She had seen him do it 100 times, and never once watched it. She watched it now. The ruined hand and the good one, and no eyes on the work at all, brought one long edge of the sack across the other, smoothed it, and then took the corner and turned it up into a point, and turned the whole thing, and folded again, and turned it. Until in the space of 10 seconds, a flopping burlap sack had become a tight 3-cornered wedge, sitting square in his palm. The point tucked under. Every edge crisp, and he did not seem to know he had done it. His hands had done it the way your heart beats, without asking you. And Cora, watching, felt the splinter go all the way in, because she remembered the folded cloth in the trunk, wrapped corner to corner into that same exact triangle. And she remembered what he'd said. Not a keepsake. Not a blanket. He'd said, "Colors up." And she did not know what a color bearer was, or what colors were, or why a man might carry a flag folded into a triangle so it could never touch the ground. She did not have the words for any of it yet. But she knew, standing at that broken fence with her breath smoking in the cold, that she had watched a hero pour out his own coffee every morning for 31 years and never once looked at him right. She did not know the shape of the thing, but she had felt its weight. "Josiah," she said, and her voice had gone strange. "What were you? Before here? What were you before you came?" He set the folded sack down gentle on the wire. He picked up his coffee. And he said, in the flat plain voice that closed doors gently, "A hand, same as now." And he turned back to the fence, and that was the end of what he would give her. She went home. But she could not let it lie. Because a man does not fold a feed sack the way you fold a nation's flag by accident, and a man does not take off his hat to a grease rag, and something was wrong in the shape of things, wrong in a way that could not be set right by leaving it alone. She offered him a place. Her cousin ran a boarding house in town and would take the old man on for cheap, out of the barn and out of the weather, and Josiah thanked her with a nod and did not say yes. and did not say no, which she had learned by now meant no. He would not be a charge on anybody. He would sleep in the barn until they ran him off it, and then he would sleep somewhere else, and he would ask nobody for a thing, because asking meant owing, and owing meant being seen, and being seen was the one thing in all the world Josiah Bell could not bear. But he could not let it lie either, because his colors were on a peddler's wagon. That was the thing Cora could not know. That while she lay awake turning the puzzle over, the old man lay awake in the swept barn with a worse thing in him, that the standard of the 3rd Kearney Volunteers, the cloth 13 men had died under, the cloth a dying wife had stitched 13 names into by lamplight, the cloth he had carried 19 miles out of hell on his back, with the blood not yet dry on it, was hanging over a rail in a livery stable in Ashford, smeared with grease, 12 cents worth of wiping rag, to a boy who meant no harm and did not know. He had let it go. In the yard, when the boy shook it out and the crowd laughed, he had stood frozen and let it go. Because to reach for it, to say what it was, to say the names, he could not. 19 years he had not said the names to a living soul. The words were behind a door in him that he had sealed with his own hands, and he had learned that if he did not open that door he could go on living, could rake a yard and mend a fence and drink his coffee, and if he opened it, he did not know what would come through. So in the yard he had chosen silence over the flag, one more time, and taken off his hat, and let a stranger carry it away. He could not do it twice. He waited 2 days. 2 days of turning it in the dark. And on the second evening, when the light went long and gold over the emptied hills the way it had for 31 years, Josiah Bell put on his one clean shirt and walked the 4 miles into Ashford Town to the livery where Hobie Teal kept his wagon. He had, in the whole world, $12 and a few things not worth naming. And he had one thing that was worth more than all his wage laid end to end. A watch. A dead man's watch. It had belonged to a boy named Tom Ferris, who had been 18 at Powder Gap and had not lived to be 19, and Josiah had carried Tom Ferris the last 9 of those 19 miles when the boy could no longer walk, and Tom had died in the gray of the morning with his head in the old man's lap, and had pressed the watch into Josiah's ruined hand and made him take it, and said, "Take it home. Take it to my mother." And Josiah had tried and could not find her. The war had scattered everything, and so he had kept it, wound it every night for 19 years, the one clockwork sound in his silent life. It was the only thing he owned that a dead friend had touched. And it was worth a good deal of money. Real money. More money than a folded rag would ever fetch. He found Hobie Teal sitting on the tailgate of his wagon in the livery yard in the last of the light, eating cold beans out of a can, and the gray cloth was still there over the harness rail, filthy now, grease-dark, and something in Josiah's chest turned over at the sight of it hung up like a hide to cure. "Evening," said Hobie, wary, because it was the old deaf hand from the sale, the one the whole town was laughing about, and Hobie was a decent enough young man, and did not much like being part of the laughing now that he saw the old fellow up close, the clean shirt, the hat held in the ruined hands. Josiah did not waste words. He never had. "That cloth," he said, and nodded at the rail. "The one you bought. I'll trade you for it." Hobie looked at the rag, and looked at the old man, and did not know what to make of it. "That thing? It's grease-rotted, mister. It's not worth the 12 cents I gave. You don't want to trade for that. I'll trade you for it," Josiah said again, and he brought his good hand out of his coat, and in it was the watch, Tom Ferris's watch, gold-cased, worn smooth, still ticking, and he held it out flat on his palm in the last of the light so the young man could see what it was and what it was worth. Fair and more than fair, this for that. Hobie Teal stopped chewing. He looked at the watch. He was a peddler, and he knew value the way Rourke knew value, and he knew that watch was worth 20 grease rags, worth 50, worth more than his whole wagon of straps and buckles. And he knew that a thing was badly out of true when a poor old man walked 4 miles to trade a gold watch for a rotted cloth he could have any rag in the county for. And Hobie, to his credit, felt the wrongness of it, felt his stomach go uneasy, and he set down his can of beans and said, "Now hold on. Hold on, mister, what is that thing? What'd I buy?" Because a man don't trade gold for a dish rag, and you're standing there fixing to, so it ain't a dish rag, is it? And Josiah Bell looked at the young man in the falling dark, with his colors hung on the rail between them and a dead boy's watch cooling in his open hand, and behind his eyes, the door he had sealed 19 years ago moved on its hinge, and this is the moment. The exact moment where the old man had to choose whether to open it at last. Josiah did not answer the question, not the way Hobie wanted. He kept the watch out on his palm, and he waited, and the waiting did more than words. A man who will not explain himself is either a fool or a man who has carried something so long that there are no words left worn smooth enough to say it. Hobie looked at the old face and decided it was not a fool. "It's mine to want," Josiah said finally. "That's all. It was in my trunk before your 12 cents ever touched it. A man likes to keep what's his. That ain't an answer. It's the one you get." Hobie chewed the inside of his cheek. He looked at the gold, and the gold looked back at him, worth 50 rags, worth his whole rack of buckles. And here is the thing about a young man with an honest streak in him. The honest streak does not always win, but it always speaks. Hobie heard it speak. And Hobie, God help him, still took the trade. Because the watch was there, and the rag was nothing, and a man has to eat. He picked the cloth off the rail. He shook the grease dust off it, almost gentle now, as if the old man's want had made it worth more than it had been a minute ago. He held it out. Josiah took it in his ruined right hand, the 2-fingered hand, and he did not snatch it. He folded it against his chest with the flat of that hand the way you'd hold a sleeping child so it does not wake. Then he set the watch in Hobie's palm and closed the young fingers over it. His name was Tom Ferris, Josiah said. He was 18. Winded Sundays. And he turned and walked back out into the dark, 4 miles home, an old man carrying a rag that no one in that whole territory knew the worth of but him. Behind the barn at the Lundquist place, in the last gray before full night, Josiah Bell did a thing he had not done in 19 years. He unfolded it. He shook it out to its full span, both arms wide, the way you open a thing you mean to look at true. And it was not a rag. It had never been a rag. It was a standard, hand-stitched, the field of it scorched brown-black where fire had licked it and gone out, the cloth stiff in places where old blood had dried into the weave and never come clean. Along the bottom hem ran 13 names, embroidered small and careful in thread that had once been white. Sewn there by a woman's hand in a lamplit room a long way from here. A dying man's wife who had taken the colors when they came home wrapped around her husband and had sat up nights putting the boys' names into the cloth because there was no other stone to cut them on. 13 names. Josiah could not read most of them anymore. He did not need to read them. He knew them the way you know your own teeth with your tongue. He held it up in the dark, and the wind took the edge of it and moved it, and for one breath it stood out on the air like it had stood out once over 19 miles of mountain, with the whole world coming apart underneath it. Then he folded it. Corner to corner. A triangle, the way his hands had folded every feed sack and every dish rag and every scrap of cloth for 19 years without him ever once deciding to. Because the hands remembered even when the man had told them to forget. He held the triangle to his chest. "I brought you home, boys," he said, to no one, to 13 names in fading thread. "I'm sorry it took so long," and he told not one living soul what he had. The general came to the county the second week of that same month. Harlan Ashcroft was a lean gray man in a dark coat, come to certify a railroad right-of-way that the survey lines had run straight across the old Lundquist ground. He was famous in the mild way that soldiers get famous, a name in the papers a war ago, a photograph in the courthouse hall. Men stood straighter when he passed, and he pretended not to notice, which is a courtesy the great learned to pay the rest of us. He stopped at the blacksmith's the first morning to have a shoe set on the county horse, and that is where the world began, very quietly, to turn. Deacon Pryor worked the forge in Ashford, a wide old black-armed man missing the top half of one ear, taken off by a mini-ball at a river whose name he never said. He was setting the shoe when a sound came across the yard from where the day hands loitered waiting on their errands. It was not much of a sound. It was an old man humming, low, tuneless to anybody who did not know the tune. Deacon knew the tune. His hammer came down and stopped on the anvil and stayed there. He lifted his head. Across the yard sat Josiah Bell on a mounting block, waiting to carry a message back out to the buyer who now held his old bunkhouse, and he was humming the way a man hums when his mind is somewhere behind his eyes. It was a march. A quick step. And Deacon Pryor had heard that march exactly once in his life, played by a fife across a valley in the smoke, played by a regiment that every history book in the country said had gone into Powder Gap and never come out. The 3rd Kearney. Wiped to the last man. A ghost regiment, a thing you told at the fire, and here was a deaf old ranch hand humming their march over a mounting block like it was nothing at all. Deacon said not a word to the general. Not then. But he set the shoe slow, and he watched Josiah Bell go, and he thought about the way the old man's hands, idle on his knees, had folded the fringe of his own coat into a small tight triangle, and let it go, and folded it again. It came together in a low room 3 days later, the way the biggest things always do. Sideways, by accident, over paperwork. The county land office. A long table, ink, the transfer of the Lundquist spread, laid out to be signed off before the right-of-way could go through. General Ashcroft at the head of it because his signature closed the railroad's business. Clerks, the landman, Elias Speck, who had told the whole town about the old fool's dish towel and gotten a good laugh for it, and Dell Rourke, in a clean collar, working the room the way he worked every room, because a visiting general was exactly the kind of important man whose good opinion a speculator likes to bank. Rourke was the one who did it. Rourke was always the one. "General, before you go," Rourke said. "Warm, oiled, you're a military man. We pulled all manner of curiosities off that property. Old West is thick with relics, and I've an eye for what sells back east. Teal here even bought himself a war rag off the block. Show him, Hobie. The general might fancy it for a wall." And Hobie Teal, who had followed the thing to town without quite knowing why, who had not been able to make himself use the cloth for grease, and had not been able to say why either, drew the folded square out of his coat and set it on the table in front of the general. A little ashamed, a little hopeful, 12 cents worth of nothing to show a great man. Ashcroft picked it up the way you pick up any old cloth. Careless, half a smile ready for the joke. Then, his thumb found the hem. He turned it toward the window light. He read along the bottom edge, the small faded thread, the 13 names, and the smile went off his face like a lamp blown out. He stood up. His chair scraped back and fell over behind him, and nobody moved to right it. He opened the cloth, both hands slow, and he saw the scorch, and he saw the blood gone to brown in the weave, and he saw, worked into the field where the fire had spared it, the number of a regiment that he had watched die from a ridge 19 years before, as a young lieutenant, with the wind carrying their fife up to him. Harlan Ashcroft, general, took off his hat. He laid it on the table. He came up straight, heels together, and he brought his right hand up to his brow, and he held a full salute to a folded piece of cloth in a room full of men who traded land for a living. The room went dead quiet. Rourke's mouth was still half open on the sales pitch it had been making. The general held the salute. Held it. 10 seconds is a long time when a great man is standing at attention, and you do not know why, and you are afraid to breathe. Then he brought the hand down, and he looked up, and his voice when it came was not loud. It did not need to be. "Gentlemen," he said, "you sold the colors of the 3rd Kearney Volunteers for 12 cents. Nobody spoke. Every man who marched under this," Ashcroft said, "was reported dead. 19 years ago. At a place called Powder Gap, he touched the scorched field with 2 fingers, gentle as a man touching a coffin. This regiment does not exist. The record says so. It went into the gap 1,800 strong, and the record says not one came out. This is a ghost you have been wiping harness with." Elias Speck, who had made the town laugh about a dish towel, found something on the table to look at and could not lift his eyes off it again. Rourke recovered first. Rourke always recovered first, because a certain kind of man's mind does not run to shame, it runs to arithmetic. "Well now," he said, and you could hear the figures ticking behind it. "Well now, that's. General, that is a considerable thing. A considerable thing, and you'll understand it's auction property. Bought lawful off the Lundquist estate, sold fair on the block, and Mr. Teal here holds title to it, though I'm sure a reasonable." His tongue went over his lip. "A museum. A collector back east. A piece like that. A genuine lost battle color. Why, that's not 12 cents. That's a sum. That's a real." "Who carried it out?" The general did not raise his voice to cut him. He just said it, and it cut anyway. Rourke stopped. "The record says no one lived," Ashcroft said. "A color does not walk 19 miles by itself. Someone carried these off that field under fire and kept them 19 years and let them end up on your auction block. Who?" He looked around the room, and the railroad and the land and the money were all gone out of his face, and what was left was only the young lieutenant on the ridge who had watched the fife go silent. "Who carried it out?" "Somebody in this county knows. The man is likely dead a long time. I would like his name spoken out loud, once, before I leave here." And no one in that room could answer him. Except that the door was open, and Deacon Pryor was standing in it. He had come down to the office on some errand of iron, and he had heard the last of it through the doorway, and now he came in with his hat in his hand, the big black-armed smith with half an ear, and every clerk turned to look at him. "There's a handout at the old Lundquist place," Deacon said. His voice was rough and slow. "Deaf old fella. Been there 31 years. Nobody thinks a thing of him." He turned the hat in his hands. "He hums the march of the 3rd Kearney while he works. General, I heard it, and it about stopped my heart, because I heard that same march played once from the wrong side of a valley, and I never thought to hear it again, out of a living mouth." And he folds every rag he touches into a triangle. Every one, corners in, like a man puts away a flag. The general looked at him a long moment. "Send for him," he said. They sent a boy on a fast horse, and the room waited, and nobody in it could think of a word worth saying while they waited, and Cora Lundquist, who had come to sign her father's ground away and stood by the wall through all of it with her hand over her mouth, began, very quietly, to understand what she had watched all those mornings and never once seen. He came in from the yard. That was the thing that broke people. After, not the salute, not the names, but the door opening and an old man coming through it in his work apron, hat in his ruined hands, no idea in the world why the county had sent for him, blinking in the lamplight at all the important faces turned his way. Josiah Bell, 72, come in from mending a fence that was no longer his to mend, standing small in a room that had gone silent for him and not knowing it had. "You're the hand from the Lundquist place," Ashcroft said. "Gentle, the way you speak to something you are afraid of startling." Josiah read the mouth and nodded. "What's your name?" The old man's eyes went past the general to the table, to the cloth, opened out on the wood, the scorch and the blood, and the 13 names lying there naked under the lamp in front of 40 years of strangers. And something moved across his face that no one there had a name for, and his ruined hand tightened on the brim of his hat. "Bell," he said. "Josiah Bell." The general turned to the clerk. "Read the muster," he said. The third Kearney. "Read the roll of the color guard." They had it. The railroad had brought the regimental records down for the right-of-way, old military ground, and the clerk found the page with shaking fingers and ran them down the list and read it out in a thin voice into the quiet color guard, Powder Gap. Corporal Amos Reed, killed. Private Thomas Ferris, killed. Private, the boy's voice caught, Bell, J., color bearer. Missing, presumed dead. Presumed dead. The clerk lowered the page, and General Harlan Ashcroft looked at the living man standing in front of him in an apron, the man the paper had buried 19 years ago, and he asked him the last question, plainly, the way you ask a thing you already know but need to hear said aloud so that everyone in the room hears it too. "Is that you?" he said. "Did you carry these out?" Josiah Bell stood there a long time. Then he said 3 words. "Somebody had to." And that was all. That was the whole account of it. From the only mouth that could give it, somebody had to. He would say no more. Not then. Not ever. Really. And it was left to the general, and to Deacon, and to the record itself to tell the rest of what those 3 words held down. Because here is what those 3 words held down. The gap had gone bad by noon. The line broke, and the boys who were left fell back through timber, with the fire following them, and the color bearer ahead of them went down, and Josiah, 19 years old less than these 13, took the colors off the dead man, because a regiment does not leave its colors, and he ran. He ran with them wrapped around his own body under his coat, so the enemy could not see them and take them, and a boy named Tom Ferris ran beside him until Tom Ferris couldn't. Until a ball took him low, and he went down in the leaves, and Josiah went back and got him and carried him too. Carried a dying boy, and a regiment's honor 19 miles through mountains with no water, and a right hand mangling on rope and rock until 2 fingers were gone to rot. Tom Ferris died on the 9th of those 19 miles, with his head in Josiah's lap, and gave him the gold watch, and asked him to wind it Sundays. And Josiah came down out of the mountains 2 days later carrying the colors and nothing else, and there was no regiment to give them back to. Because there was no regiment, there was a number in a book that said everyone was dead, including him. So he did the only thing a man like that knows how to do. He went and found work. He mended fence. He broke ice on a horse trough the year the creek froze solid, and every year after for 31 years. He folded the colors into a triangle and put them in a trunk, and he wound a dead boy's watch on Sundays, and he never told a living soul. Because to tell it he would have had to say the 13 names out loud, and he could not do that. He could carry them 19 miles. He could not say them. Somebody had to. Now watch the room. Watch each face take it. Rourke moved first. Of course Rourke. Because even now, even standing in it, the arithmetic would not stop running. He took half a step toward the table, toward the cloth, and his hand came up, and you could see the words forming. Auction property, lawful sale, a sum, a real sum. And the general did not even look at him. Ashcroft simply put his own hand flat on the colors and said, without turning his head, "You will not touch that." 4 words. And Dell Rourke, who had faced down 40 buyers and a dead man's daughter and never blinked, stood with his hand in the air over a folded flag and could not make it go the last inch, and he brought it back empty, and the clever curdled off his face and left only a man who had sold something holy for 12 cents in front of a general and a full room, and would be known for it in this county for the rest of his natural life. He was not ruined by law. He was ruined by every eye that turned to him, and then turned away. Hobie Teal went white. The peddler stood staring at his own hand, the hand that had taken 12 cents worth of nothing, and hung it over a harness rail to wipe grease, and then, before anyone could stop him, he crossed to Josiah and dug in his coat, and came out with the watch, Tom Ferris's watch, gold and warm, and he tried to give it back, pushed it at the old man's chest. And when Josiah would not take it, he pried the ruined fingers open and set the watch in the palm and folded them shut over it with both his hands, the way Josiah had folded them shut over it 3 weeks before. "I can't," Hobie said, and his voice cracked all the way through. "I can't have that. Take it. God, mister, take your friend's watch back." And then, softer, the only absolution the young man had to offer, he pressed the 12 cents in too. A dime and 2 pennies, into the same closed hand, and closed the old man's fingers over the whole of it and could not say another word. Elias Speck, the clerk who had made the town laugh about a dish towel, never did lift his eyes. He signed what he had to sign looking down. He did not joke about anything for a long while after. And Cora Lundquist came off the wall. She had poured that man coffee every morning for years the way her dead father had, a small kindness passed down, not knowing, never knowing, that the deaf old hand wrapping his ruined fingers around the warm tin was a color sergeant that his country had buried alive in a book. She came and stood in front of him, and she was weeping, openly, the way you weep at a thing too big to hold. And she did not say she was sorry because sorry was too small. She only took his hand, the good one, in both of hers and held it. And Josiah, who did not much understand what all these people were carrying on about, patted her knuckles twice. Awkward. The way an old man comforts a crying girl, and that undid her completely. The general let it be for a moment. Then he did what he had the authority above every man in that room to do. "Read this into the county record," Ashcroft said to the clerk, and his voice had gone formal now. Official. The voice that closes things. "Josiah Bell, Color Sergeant, 3rd Kearney Volunteers, is living, strike presumed dead. His conduct at Powder Gap, the recovery of the regimental colors, and the attempted recovery of a wounded man under fire is entered for citation to be forwarded to the department for the medal it should have carried 19 years ago." He paused. "And there is the matter of the pension." Rourke's head came up to spite himself. "A soldier listed dead draws no pension," the general said. "This man has drawn none for 19 years because your record killed him. That is 19 years owed, with the arrears, to be computed and paid in full to Josiah Bell out of the department fund, and I will sign the order before I leave this county so that no clerk mislays it." He looked around at all of them. 19 years. The man mended fence for $1 a month, while the government he bled for owed him a soldier's wage and did not know he was alive to pay it. That is corrected, today. In this room. In front of the men who sold his colors for 12 cents. Then he lifted the flag off the table. Everyone thought, you could feel the room think it, that he would take it, carry it off to a capitol, a case, a wall of honor, where great men keep such things. It was his by every right of rank and history. He folded it instead, corner to corner, a triangle. Ashcroft's hands did not know the fold the way Josiah's did, and he fumbled it once, and no one breathed, and he got it right the second time. And he carried it around the table to the old man in the apron, and he held it out on both his open palms, the way you return a thing to its owner. "These were never mine, Sergeant," the general said. "They were never the department's. 13 men gave them to your keeping, and you kept them 19 years past your own death. There is a memorial being raised on the ridge above the old ground come spring." He pushed the folded triangle gently into Josiah's arms. "You will carry these at the head of it. That is not an order. A man cannot be ordered to do the one thing he has already done his whole life. It is a request from a lieutenant who watched your regiment die and has wondered every year since whether anyone got out. Josiah took the colors back into his ruined hands. He looked down at the triangle, the scorch, the thread, and whatever door had moved on its hinge that night behind the barn came all the way open at last, quiet, no sound to it, and the old man's face did a thing it had not done in 19 years, and 2 tears went down into the creases, and hung there, and fell, and he did not wipe them, because both his hands were full. Somebody had to, he said again, softer, but this time it was not the account. This time it was thank you. And the general, who spoke that language, heard it, and came to attention one more time, and held it, and this time 13 names and 1 living man were in the room to receive the salute. Spring came up the ridge above the old Lundquist ground 6 months on. It was a small column. It is always a small column for the oldest wars. The crowds go to the fresh graves and forget the far ones. But the whole of Ashford that had any decency in it walked up the ridge that Saturday in April, and at the head of the column went an old man in a clean coat that still did not fit his shoulders, carrying a folded flag against his chest in a 2-fingered hand. Deacon Pryor walked at his side, the big Smith matching his pace to the old man's slow one, and General Harlan Ashcroft walked a full pace behind, where a lieutenant walks behind a color sergeant, deferring the whole way up as if the stars on his own collar had come off in his pocket, and everyone saw it, and everyone understood it. At the top they had set a stone, and a man read the 13 names into the wind, slow, one at a time, the names off the hem, and where the thread had faded past reading Josiah, said them himself from memory into the reader's ear, all 13, every one, out loud at last, Amos Reed, Thomas Ferris, and the 11 more, because he could say them now. That was the pension no order could pay. He could finally say their names. He unfolded the colors at the stone and let the April wind take them one more time, full span, scorch and blood and threads standing out on the air over the ground they'd bled for, and then he folded them again, corner to corner, triangle, and set them at the foot of the stone, and stood bareheaded, the same bareheaded he'd stood at the auction, while the men laughed. Only now the whole ridge stood bareheaded with him. The pension arrears, when it came, was more money than Josiah Bell had seen in his life, and he did almost nothing with it. He bought back 1 corner of the old Lundquist land, a fence line, a trough, a stand of cottonwood, and put it in Cora's keeping, and asked only to be let go on mending that fence and breaking that ice for whatever years were left him. She let him. She brought him coffee every morning still, the small kindness come all the way around. And now she brought it with both hands, because the first time she'd tried, after, her hands had shook so bad she'd spilled it. Dell Rourke left the county before the first snow. His auctions did not draw the crowds they had. A man who sells a regiment's colors for 12 cents in front of a general finds that his shrewdness has a smell to it now that buyers do not care for. He went west and did not write. Elias Speck stayed and did his clerking and was never once again heard to make a joke about a rag. And Hobie told the story to anyone who would hold still for it, up and down every road he drove, harness and buckles and this one tale, how he once bought a general's battle flag off an auction block for 12 cents to wipe his leather, and sold it back for a gold watch, and bought it back again with nothing but a handshake and a dozen pennies pressed into an old man's hand. He told it as a shame he'd earned, and a grace he hadn't, and he told it right, which is more than most of us manage with our lives. Josiah Bell lived 4 more years on that fence line. The town tipped its hat when he passed now, the same town that had pitied him, laughed at his dish towel, called him the deaf old fool, and he tipped his back, and never once, to the end, did he speak of the Gap, or the 19 miles, or the boy who died on the 9th of them with a watch in his hand. He wound the watch on Sundays. He folded every rag into a triangle. And when he went, at last, quiet as he'd lived, they buried him on the ridge under the stone with the 13 names, and cut a 14th into it, and folded the colors over him corner to corner one final time. Some men carry the colors home and never say a word about it. They break your ice and mend your fence and let you call them fools, and the debt the world owes them just sits there, gathering, year on year, because they will not present the bill. And most of the time, no general ever comes down the road to read the muster and set it right. Most of the time, the 12 cents is the end of the story. So maybe the thing to do is look a little harder at the quiet old man raking the same yard for 31 years. Maybe the rag is not a rag. Maybe the debt is already owed, and only waiting on somebody to see it. Comment the town you're watching from, and tell me, in your own place, who's the quiet one nobody's saluted yet?